Shalom, shalom. This is the book of Romans, chapter 1, verse 16. It says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ," or Hamashiach, "for it is the power of Yahweh unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith." So I want to examine this word Greek here and point out something that's in the interlinear. Most High willing, the sheep can be edified. So when you go into the interlinear and look up this term Greek, so the word is Helene. It says the outline of biblical usage. It says a Greek either by nationality, meaning the place where you were born, not your racial identification. It says whether a native of the mainland or of the Greek islands or colonies. So the second definition here is very important, and a lot of people overlook this. I never seen anyone that can explain it in its proper the proper way. It says, in a wider sense, the name embraces all nations, not Jews, that made the language and customs and learning of the Greeks their own. The primary reference is to the difference of religion and worship. So here it says, in a wider sense, the name embraces all nations. So this implies that it primarily uses this term to focus on the Israelites who were called Greeks. So let's do this here. So a wider sense means non-directly. You know, if you're using it in its context, you don't use it in a wider sense. So let's go here to Google. Let's see, wider sense meaning. It says, in a wider sense means to consider something with a broader, more encompassing viewpoint, encompassing more aspects, details, or implications. It essentially looking at the situation or concept from a higher level of abstraction. So let's dive deeper. It says the phrase in its wider sense, or in a wider sense, is used to describe a concept or term when it is being considered in a more general, inclusive, or expansive way, rather than a narrow, specific one. So to look at something in its wider sense, you're not being specific. So Paul is using this in the book of Romans, chapter 1, verse 16, in a specific way. He's not using it in a broad way. He's addressing a particular people. So it says, think of it this way: narrow sense, focusing on the most direct or specific definition of a word or concept. So when it says in the blue letter, it says in a wider sense, is going outside of the norm. So this implies that to think of the Greek outside of the Israelites who were in Greek customs is to take it to its broader sense, or take it out of its context. The wide sense, considering a broad range of applications, interpretations, or implications of that word or concept. For example, you might talk about a specific type of art in its narrow sense, but in its wider sense, you might be referring to all forms of creative expression. Keys and ideas associated with wider sense: generality, moving beyond specifics to encompass broader categories or principles. Inclusivity, considering a wide range of elements or perspectives. Broad interpretation, allowing for more flexible or expansive understanding of a term or concept. Looking at the bigger picture, taking a step back to consider the overall context and implications. In essence, in its wider sense, is a way of indicating that you are shifting from a limited perspective, see that, to a more comprehensive one. So when you use that term Greek in Romans, the first chapter and the 16th verse, in its wider sense, to embrace all nations, you're using it out of context. You're shifting from the limited perspective to a more comprehensive one. So the limited perspective is the normal one, is the direct, so this Greek is not somebody of another nation. This is an Israelite who was immersed in Greek culture. Shalom.